meeting of the calendar year and to reflect on this past year and all the accomplishments that City Council, together with our residents and our city staff, is really wonderful. So I want to take a minute to say and wish each of you a happy holiday and a wonderful holiday season with you and your families. Looking at the agenda overview under the work session agenda items, we have a couple guests here this evening. Brown Edwards will do what they do annually and show or provide the annual comprehensive financial report. Donna will provide the introduction. We then also have kind of the second part to what was the Lynchburg Parks and Recreation Master Plan. It's been 20 plus years since you've kind of set upon and accomplished said task, so I'm really encouraged for you. And then also a review of the legislative package. You'll recall that October 25th, I had submitted kind of a proposed package, and then we talked a little bit on the first. I've gotten some feedback from a couple of you and also some big feedback from the public. And then also we had our legislative dinner on November 15th. And so the opportunity this evening is for us to engage one another about the package, some of the feedback that I've received, and then you'll see that this afternoon or this evening it's on for general business for adoption. I would recommend, considering that the General Assembly is upon us, you do have a scheduled meeting January 10th, which is the day before the General Assembly, but if there's at least large support and or a consensus around the package, I would encourage you to adopt this evening. We have at least 4 business item briefings and then two topics for closed session. And with that, Madam Mayor, I turn back the agenda to you.
Thank you very much. We'll start off with the presentation of the FY 2022 Comprehensive Financial Report, the ACFR, and related reports. Ms. Donna Witt.
Thank you. Each year, by state code, we're required to do an external audit. Brown Edwards has had our contract for about 16 years, maybe a little bit longer, and we've formed an excellent relationship with them. They do a very comprehensive dive into our books, and which we appreciate. And Chris Banta, who is a partner with Brown Edwards, will be presenting the audit from this year.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Donna, and good afternoon. As Donna mentioned, my name is Chris Banta. I'm the partner with oversight of your financial statement audit. Also have oversight of the schools, also Greater Lynchburg Transit as well, and Business Development Center, which are separate audits from what I'll talk about today. But as you digest this document that I know you have electronically, these reports are getting bigger and bigger each year. I have some that are up to 300 pages now for some of my local governments, so it's
Which is a good question. I mean, normally it is in our packet. I didn't find it in mine.
As I understand, I talked to the city clerk earlier, and it's been uploaded and is in your packet.
And I sent an email earlier last week as well with all the documents.
I'm in Dropbox, and it shows the agenda item, but there's not, is it somewhere else in there?
Yep, it's just in your Dropbox.
It was in the email.
It just has this. Oh, okay, gotcha.
all right. Well, like I said, you should have a copy of it, I hope. And as you
17
digest,
minutes ago.
okay. As you digest this document, either today or over the next couple months, please feel free to reach out with any questions. Just want to thank the city folks and the school folks for their work. This is a long process. It starts about 9 months ago, culminates today with a presentation. I met with city management today, went over some of the high-level results of the city manager, and I'll go over some of the higher-level results as well today. Our audit is broken up into 5 phases. The primary phase, of course, is giving you an opinion on how materially correct your financial statements are. The financial statements themselves are about 25 pages long of statements, followed by well over 150 pages of footnotes. I'm happy to report today that the primary reason you engage us is the opinion on the financial statements. And once again, the city received a unmodified opinion. That's the highest level of assurance that we can give on a set of audited financial statements. So also, I'd like to remind you that the city does prepare this document themselves. Some of our clients rely on us to prepare that. This document, this large document, and implementation of all new standards is all performed by your team here. The second phase of our audit, because you're a government entity, we are required to analyze your internal controls your processes, your procedures, what you have in place to prevent or detect fraud or prevent errors in these financial statements. If we detect problems, whether it be in the design of your processes, something that would expose you to a heightened level of risk of fraud or error, we would have to report those as what we call material weakness or significant deficiency. We'd have to report that in this report. Happy to report no items to report there. And that's kind of uncommon with most of my clients. Someone usually has something. Happy to report that you have a very clean internal control report. Also, because you are a local government in the state of Virginia, we were provided a compliance supplement by the Auditor of Public Accounts of Virginia. And there's a number of compliance procedures we're supposed to perform during that testing and during the audit in conjunction with looking at your financial statements. If we have findings, whether it be immaterial items or significant items, we are supposed to include them in here. We had one immaterial item that's reported at the back of the financials that I'd be happy to discuss at any point in time, but it is an immaterial item related to a budget item at the schools. The fourth phase of our audit is related to the federal single audit. The city received and expended over $45 million of federal awards this year at the schools, social services, at the city. As part of our audit, we're required to perform a rotational testing of all those significant programs. This year, we looked at about $25.5 million of those federal awards, which is about as close to 60% of your federal funding. During that testing, we are required to test individual programs. As has been the case this year, last year, the year before, and for the years to come, COVID funding is getting the highest level of scrutiny from us, and we're required to test that every year. We tested about 8 or 9 programs this year. We tested both controls and compliance and have no findings to report. We had no significant findings to report. We had one immaterial finding related to one program, but nothing that would require report modification or anything of that nature. The last phase of our audit, because you have a commercial airport as part of the reporting entity, we are required to perform what's called a passenger facility charge compliance audit. The FAA requires us to perform hyper-focused testing on how the airport manages the PFC funds, which is an add-on charge to ticket prices at the airport, how you spend that, how you manage that, how you report that funding. As part of that, we were required to test both compliance and how you manage that program. Happy to report no findings from an internal control or compliance standpoint there. Any questions on the results of the audit?
You mentioned 2 very insignificant findings. Since you mentioned them, can you kind of elaborate on them?
Sure. One item related to, we tested the SNAP program, was a federal program. We picked very large samples of transactions and case files, and we found one where there was a number entered incorrectly. It was caught later, but because it was entered correctly or incorrectly, we have to report that as a finding. It was corrected. And because we deemed it isolated, it didn't rise to the level of material weakness or a material report modification. The other item relates to the school budget. The school budget as a whole was not overspent, but there was a line item that was overspent slightly, a very insignificant amount in the grand scheme of the budget for the schools. And like I said, the whole budget for the schools as a whole was not overspent, but a line item had an overspending. And so we are required to report that, even though it was not deemed a material matter. So
Did the line items, did they change it where they're doing, where the executive can actually spend up to like $20,000 individual items, or is that?
I'd have to look
Without
dig,
board
I'd look into our
approval.
control documentation for, so you're just asking, is the executive allowed to spend $20,000
Without board approval.
I'd have to look at our
Like a
control
de minimis
documentation.
amount, but
Yeah.
still.
This related to some health insurance claims, I think,
Okay.
that came through. I think if you look at the finding, there's a description there, says some, health insurance claims, they're self-insured, large claims can come through.
Yep.
I believe that was the case there, so.
Thank you.
So that's the results of the audit. I'm also required to just let you know how the audit as a whole went, both at the city and the schools. If we had significant disagreements, unusual circumstances similar to significant audit adjustments requiring the audit to be clean, I would have to report that to you to just let you know anything that, any hurdles that had to be overcome to get to that clean opinion. I'm happy to report no significant matters to report there for either the city or the school's audit. And also attached to these communications, which I believe are also in your packet, you'll see a copy of the management representation letter That's the letter that management provides to us at the end of their audit, at the end of our audit, just to let us know that they've answered all of our questions truthfully. We provided all the information we need to opine on your financials. We date, we sign that, and then management signs that, and we're done the audit. We provide that as a copy to governance to see, just so you understand the representations that management is making to us, essentially on the city's behalf. So. Any questions?
Any questions?
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Chris.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. And next, I'd like to call on Jenny Jones to talk about the Lynchburg Parks and Recreation Master Plan.
Mayor Dolan, Vice Mayor Wright, members of City Council. The last time the Parks and Recreation Department conducted a needs assessment and comprehensive master plan was 24 years ago. The Parks and Recreation Department proposed this current needs assessment project, and City Council approved the funding for the study in the 2021 capital improvement project budget. The needs assessment request for proposals generated 7 very qualified firms. A team of city staff, including finance, community development, information technology, and Parks and Rec, conducted an extensive screening process, scoring their proposals and finalist presentations. Lowe's Design out of Nashville, Tennessee, was awarded the contract. The needs assessment study led to this comprehensive park master plan, an all-encompassing look at the department from our recreation program offerings to our fees, to park maintenance, to organizational structure, to the build-out of the capital improvement plan for the next 10 years. This project kicked off in February of 2021 with a data set request from the consultants. Community engagement, that process was incredibly successful. It kicked off in March of 2021. It included city council interviews as well as interviews with city leaders and key staff, along with stakeholder meetings and focus group interviews. And it had over a 90% attendance rate. Those were all invite only. And then we had 23 pop-ups hosted by the consultants and Lynchburg Parks and Rec that had over 900 participants. The project website had close to 2,000 unduplicated participants. There were thousands more that visited and perused the project website but did not log in. In the end, the project will have had over 4,000 citizens directly engaging in the parks and recreation needs of Lynchburg. The consultants have used this extraordinary community engagement feedback, as well as benchmarking, population-based and access-based level of service analysis, site evaluations, gap analysis, connectivity analysis, and best practices research to create the recommendations found in the Lynchburg Parks and Recreation Master Plan. This plan will be used as a visionary framework for long-term use and development. Some recommendations may or may not be considered and implemented based on changing real-world conditions and other applicable factors. Now I'd like to introduce the project manager, Josh Gulick from Lowe's Design, who will discuss their findings and recommendations.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me today. Works. Awesome. Well, we are very excited to be here for the workshop. I know you have one more approval meeting after this, but we are very excited to present the final findings and give you the opportunity to review as you go into your final council session. This is something that our firm is very passionate about. We believe that every community needs a vision and an opportunity for planning their recreation for the future. I think it's a very, very big part of being successful, and a lot of different things that we'll uncover through this presentation today. So today, we're gonna walk through benefits of parks introduction. We're gonna talk a little bit about each little piece, each larger piece of the report. I do want to remind you that this is a brief overview. I'm gonna be very brief tonight. And we're essentially taking 2 years worth of work. We're condensing it down into this presentation. So I do want to just reiterate the importance of making sure you read the report to get that text, get the fine dots, the points. We're gonna do the best we can tonight. So with that being said, we'll jump into our team. So Lowe's Design, the way that we work with these communities and we work with these parks master plans is we take the national framework, we take the local data, and we take our experience as designers in doing hundreds of these plans over the last 40 years to develop recommendations specific to your community. And you'll see what that looks like tonight. The benefits of parks, I think everyone understands the benefits of parks. It's physical activity, it's mental engagement, it's social interaction, it's health benefits, it's benefits from bringing in and retaining individuals into your community and from your community. We want to, it's going to help you retain your bright college grads that are coming out that you don't want to leave your community. You want to bring them back. And this will help with that. It's one of the many benefits of parks. So a master plan for your entire park system is really organizing that. It's boiling it down. It's finding your gaps in your parks and recreation. It's trying to provide equitable benefit distribution to your community. And so we really feel we have an exciting kind of compilation of how we've done that and a guide for the future of your community in parks and recreation. So the first thing we talked about that framework. We need to understand your community. We need to gather data. We gathered data on age, race, income, amongst other things. And we found that you have a relatively young community, which was not necessarily the case as I was growing up in Virginia. And it's really based on your universities and your local colleges. That really brings that age down into your younger average. You have a very diverse community, which is wonderful. You have a community that is limited in some instances in income and is preventing some of access to your parks. We had in the higher level, your community does have a higher rate of obesity and a higher rate of inactivity, which is brought on by the inability to access your exercise options, which you have plenty of. You have wonderful parks and recreation and access to recreation. But there are these barriers that we're going to find and talk about that prevent people from using them and from getting to them. So the next kind of item that we're putting into this framework is your public engagement. So with this community, one of the things I will say is this is probably one of the largest efforts in community involvement and public engagement that I've seen through my career. And I really think we can really thank your parks director for being able to say, we need public engagement. We need this level of public engagement, which you just don't see in these plans. So we had a three-pronged approach to public engagement. The first prong was our focus groups. We met with many of you individually as we came up. We set up times and conferences and really wanted to understand what your constituents wanted and kind of what your feelings were on parks and recreation and what you needed out of this plan moving forward. The second was our pop-up events. So we had 23 pop-up events. We had the largest attended was at the Yoder, which the parks staff was attending. And we also had the other large one was at the Dick's Sporting Goods, which I was there and that was a lot of fun just watching people come into this Dick's Sporting events, being told, hey guys, we want you to interact in the activities that you're buying equipment for. Like, come on in, put your stickers on these things. It was just a blast seeing the community be involved in that. That was a lot of fun. And then we also had the project website. So in that project website, we had, within seconds of that website going live, we had people being very specific about where they wanted improvements and where they wanted parks and where they wanted activities. You can drag very specific pins to locations and tell the group, and we've got all of those documented. I think I'm standing too close. I get excited about this. It's wonderful. It's planning for your future. It's planning for your community and creating an active and aware community. So as you can see, these are a couple. On the left is kind of the product of the public engagement. On the right is just a word cloud that kind of came out as your. So the overall gist is, out of those, your community loves your parks. It loves parks and recreation. It loves the activities. It wants more. It wants upgraded facilities at your existing facilities. if we heard one thing, if we only heard one thing, it was we love trails, we want more trails, we want upgraded trails, trails. And that was really exciting to hear is your community loves your trails. It was fantastic. And that's really the highlights of your survey. These were from the pop-up engagements, and these were the top 5 desired facilities that came out of those pop-up engagements. So it's your farmer's market, your paved walking trails, your boardwalks, canoe, your fishing. Number 6 in your pop-up public engagement was a need for a recreation facility. So your community facility, potentially an aquatics facility with that. That was number 6 in the pop-ups. It was number 1 on the online public engagement. So just something to note on facilities. And programming. So this is a very similar graphic in regards to programming. So your community really expressed a desire for more concerts, movies in the park, gardening classes, arts festivals, programs for people with special needs. These all relate back to your existing facilities and your need for that new facility that people also are desiring. So common themes from both of those. We talked a little bit about these as we're walking through these, but the common themes from the online, from the public engagement is people want their parks improved, existing facilities improved. They do want a new facility. They want more nature programs and trails that we talked about. And then, one thing to note is 70% of your respondents did say that they went outside of the community to use sports facilities since they were not provided either near them or within your facilities. I think that was one of the other reasons we were hearing that your community has a great desire for additional community centers and indoor facilities. So now we're into our recommendations. Those were kind of all our analyses, and now we're working into our recommendations. And through all of our, as this kind of goes into the large funnel and gets kind of shuffled down and evaluated, we really came up with 7 areas throughout Lynchburg that were recommending facilities. And if you'll notice, these 7 areas relate very closely to the Trust for Public Lands 10-minute walk. It's really, again, about how do we provide equitable benefits that parks create to your community. And so going a little bit deeper into that, and it gets really deep into how we selected these areas within the report. But this is something that is in that report. It's going to be one of your foldouts in these pages, is your gap analysis. This is where we were able to identify. This is where you need to have improvements, have new park facilities. And by doing this and focusing on these areas, you'll be able to move closer to that equitable park benefits for your community. So these are the top 7 identified areas that really coincide with that Trust for Public Land evaluation as well. So in summary, the big recommendations are, upgrades for individual parks, recommendation for increased trail connectivity, developing a new indoor multi-purpose facility, and expanding the Templeton Senior Center. We'll talk a little bit more about that center as we move into the next slide, but that's a very important piece of the programs that you're providing to the community. Another service improvement is trails. We talked, I said trails, I think 20 times already, but we've developed a map of, I think, great opportunities for where we can do phases, phased improvements to these trails. So this is what we're calling the inner loop. This provides your greater connection to the community and these facilities. We talked about that, creating that equitable benefits of parks. I think this is kind of you're getting that access. We also heard access to these facilities is going to be a huge point. I think this really goes to the next step to say, okay, well, we're going to be very literal with trails and providing access to these points. So this is kind of the first phase for the improvements on your trails. We also created, with the help of parks, created an outer loop. So in the document, there's also an outer loop, which is a greater service area of trails, and they're currently working with Bedford and Amherst to plan for connecting the greater community to the smaller community. So as we're talking about national trends and we're talking about how we use these things, we want to identify that your age group that is of the greatest population size is now your 13 to 24 years. So what does that look like from a programming standpoint? And what facilities serve those individuals now? It's changed. It's changed a lot in my lifetime, and I know it'll change again. That's one reason that we say these are really 10-year plans. This is for the next 10 years, planning for the next 10 years of your community. And you need to stop and you need to make sure that, okay, well, moving forward for the next 10, what is our community going to look like? Communities change and activities change. So for a 13 to 24 year old age group, you're really looking at your esports, your parkour, your outdoor activities, your group activities in an outdoor setting. And I think we're providing that with our recommendations for programming and facilities. Again, programming, what we heard was concerts, movies in the park, gardening classes, arts festivals, and those can be really provided with your existing facilities and with new facilities. So that was really good to hear. So as a Parks Department, there's a goal to balance your programming to your individuals. So if you have a 27% population, you have a 39% youth program rate. So that's wonderful. You're providing more programs than your population for youth. We think that's fantastic. You want youth to have options for what they can do and how they can learn. That's fantastic. Your adult population is 48%, but you're providing 40%. So it's not too far off. Maybe it could be a little bit better. Your senior population is where we see the greatest disparity. With your 24% of your community is of that senior status, and there's 13% of your programs are able to serve that community. And this is where I will note that the Templeton Center, for instance, provided 300 and almost 400 programs for seniors this year, and had almost 13,000 people attend and register for these programmed events. It's just it's a great need that your community has that we are recommending to move that forward and grow that to serve the senior community. So what are your next steps for this? You need to expand programs. You need to create your opportunities for people to be able to access. You need to create multi-purpose fields and multi-purpose recreational facilities. We are recommending, and we have helped with creating a phased staffing plan to accommodate your recommended programs and facilities in the future. And we're recommending, of course, the outdoor programming and the facility. So how do we do this? So this is one way that we like to explain cost recovery and revenue for these programs. So when you roll out programs, you have to be very mindful of how much they are impacting the community. Is this program, are we going to spend money on this program for a very select few of individuals to attend, or are we going to spend our money to try and get the greatest number of attendees to join and to be active? So as we look at this, we think about, we're making up our revenue, and we're being very thoughtful about the programs like cooking, where you have to buy the ingredients. It's very few, it's very targeted individuals, but you're going to make revenue. People are able to pay more for that service. But when you look into something like youth sports or group activities, where you're really low entry level to the cost, but there's a great community served. So as we introduce programs and as we think about how we're funding these programs and spending money on staffing and facilities, that's the model that we want to use, is just to be very targeted on the programs and the people who use those programs and how much they'll be willing to pay for those programs. So the next step is we take a laundry list of everything that the community wants. We go through the gap analysis, and we kind of take it down to, okay, what are the next steps for funding? How do we get this going? What's the direction? So what we're recommending is accessibility and general park improvements is kind of your first phase. Existing park renovations, which are currently underway. I know the Parks Department has funding for both of these parks in different phases. New park and facility development is next, and then your trail development kind of follows that. Now these can all happen at different times. There's not specifically individual to the CIP budget. There are also grants. There's ARPA money. There's the DCR money through your local Senator Newman. There are multiple ways to identify and fund these specific targeted improvements. So in conclusion, the future is bright. Everyone in the community came out for this to show their support, offer input, tell what they liked, what they didn't like, what they wanted improvement on, and we tried to listen. And I want to thank Jenny for kind of pushing all those pop-ups, making sure that we were including as many people as we possibly could in this involvement. With that being said, any questions?
Thank you for your presentation and everyone involved for getting us to this point. I know it's a very grand project to take on. I had a couple questions for you. Are you able to articulate what % of the people polled who loved trails who did not have direct access to them? Meaning, I couldn't either walk there or I have to drive like more than 8 minutes, something like that. Would you be able to extrapolate that information?
We could. There is it would be rough figures, but we have a heat map of kind of where the respondents were.
I'm asking if we pulled that and then also where those who said about trails also heat map about that, essentially.
I don't think so. That would be tying now correct me if I'm wrong. This is where I'm going to be a little fuzzy in this, but you have to tie an IP address to a individual response.
Did we ask for addresses, or was that not something we were able to do?
We did not.
Okay. But here's my point, going back to that map, which I think was solidified a lot of what I was thinking when Jenny and I sat down and first started talking about this master plan. Gosh, I want to say 2 years ago when I was first elected. If we could pull that up, that'd be helpful. The south end of town, there's a dire need for green space, and I think it's interesting, given our conversation later tonight about potential development, coupled with the needs both for housing and then also for green space. What does that look like? And so I think that's something to keep in mind, but I do remember that being something. I thought it was also interesting about Tyriana, since that really is such a open canvas for us to imagine what that region of our city could look like. And so I was intrigued by what that might be. Is there possibility in that outer loop trail map you were talking about to potentially make it so you could walk from one county end of the city to the water and not even quote unquote touch a city street? Is that possible? If so, I'm asking to say that might be an interesting selling point. I don't know, but that might be an interesting thing to consider. If this is a 10-year plan, how can we build it out? These assets in the Timber Lake corridor, again, that's kind of where my immediate consideration goes. Can you talk about how the 1 is directly next to the 7? Because that's intriguing to me. So how is the need so strong there, but then you go over to Windsor Hills and it's dramatically different?
So number 1 is our Timber Lake, Richland, Rabelais, and then number 7 is the Windsor Hills and Leesville Road.
If you can't, that's fine. I just find that an interesting data point that the 1 and the 2 are right next to each other, and then the 7 is just down the road. Maybe Heritage Park, but I know that's such a limited offering.
So what that really says is the equity is so disparate between the south side of town and the north side of town that there just needs to be that many more facilities in this area in order to create equal opportunity throughout the community.
Some of my takeaways were I'm interested in this whole sports complex area, baseball fields. It's a growing thing in our area. We hosted a state championship for the Little League. I mean, if Lynchburg is going to be a destination, that might be something worthwhile. 24502 comes to mind. We talked about trail expansion. Senior Center intrigued me too. I know there's a lot of open office space out in Windhurst and in the Fort Hill Shopping Center. If that's something where we don't have to build out too much, and that's a program that Parks is really saying there's a need for, there might be interesting partnerships there too. So they're just some of my thoughts. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to to seeing how we can squeeze some of this into our CIP.
And I will, just to kind of piggyback on one of your comments about how to incorporate this into the community with developments coming online. I think that is one of the big things about this, is using this, as in conjunction with your zoning. You've got your zoning, your land use, and your parks plan. This is how we want you to use this. We want you to say, hey, by the way, developer, love that you're coming in here. We've got a park plan for this area. Is there, what can we, and it's right next to it, touches can you provide a path, on the backside of your community that connects into this greater network? We want you to use this as that tool. And communities that don't have this level of planning simply miss out on those opportunities. And that's why this is so exciting, is there are things like that.
Yes, again, thank you for the report. We greatly appreciate it. One thing that I found so wonderful is that it's really helping supporting the quality of life for the citizens of our community. Like I said, so many places don't have all the great resources we have, all the great trails we have. Like you can go from Blackwater Creek and take a trail all the way to downtown Lynchburg and things like that. And there's a possibility in the future where it might connect to Thomas Jefferson Popular Forest at some point. So it's just a great connectivity that we have in our community. And it's such another plus is that it's a great destination for persons. We talk about our walking trails and other parks and recs that we have in our community. So we made some great investments over the years to make our parks and rec more enticing for our citizens as well as those visiting our community. So I appreciate that. And one thing I really loved was that the diverse efforts to reach all citizens in taking part of the survey for the past 2 years, whether the pop-ups, whether it's at the city market, whether at Yoder Center, it was just all over the place. I know I participated in one at the Miller Center as well. So I really appreciate your efforts, Ms. Jones and the team, for really reaching out to everybody in the community to make sure everybody had a voice at the table. So thank you for that process. Appreciate it.
So I was going to say one thing about next steps. The plan is to be presented tomorrow to the Planning Commission at 4 p.m. And our hope is that the Planning Commission will vote to recommend adoption into the city's comp plan. And we'll be back in front of City Council on January 10th, regular meeting, and that'll be another opportunity for public comment.
It's about $102 million of capital improvement plan, according to the recommendations, of course. And so just adopting the plan, maybe we can make sure that it's a lot of times we just adopt a plan that sits there, or I don't think we have the resources to be spending $102 million. So it needs to be very targeted.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you very much. Thank you. Winter, we're going to go over our legislative package.
Vice Mayor, members of City Council, at the outset, I reminded kind of the procedural history of how we're here. You recall on October 25th, I gave you a copy of the package itself. We then on the 1st engaged one another briefly, but it's still, we engaged one another about what's in the substance of it. We had our dinner on the 15th, which was great. We had our local delegation present. They gave us some feedback on what they foresaw for this impending General Assembly. And then this evening, I'm here again to engage you and your peers on the agenda itself. Again, I thought, or at least talked about the idea of highlighting or calling it above the fold, kind of a terminology, those things that are of particular import to the city of Lynchburg. Two of which, or at least one of which from last year is the same, which is the police together with the ECOs and TDOs, and how can we problem solve for that. I know that Centra has been receptive to it. I think in this assembly, this will be this governor's second General Assembly that there's working with Senator Newman. As I recall, there might be even more opportunity to think of something creative that will help give relief to our officers that are having to stay at some of these facilities rather than out on the streets policing. I heard from Councilman Feraldi and others in support of helping to appropriately fund our state offices. I know that Councilman Feraldi particularly focused on our Commonwealth's attorney. I just increased the language because I'll say annually, and I'm amid, I call it speed budgeting. I meet with all 17 departments, plus each of the state offices, constitutional officers, council appointees, about their individual budgets. And I'll say annually, or at least in my year and a half here, that any one of these, Commissioner of the Revenue, the Sheriff's Office, the Commonwealth's Attorney, Treasurer, Judges, Circuit Court, General District Court, J&DR, are all in some kind of need because the state hasn't stepped up and really helped support those offices in a way in which is impactful. And so if you look at the language, it says state-supported local employees. Councilman Feraldi, I just went a little bit further in acknowledging those other offices. So that was my stylistic decision, and if that doesn't meet with what council wants to support, we certainly can amend the language to reflect what it is. And the last one was SWAT, and we had a circumstance at one of our high schools where this has happened, and it's created an issue, not simply for Lynchburg, but for also the Commonwealth, and I call it the nation. And there's certain legislation that we're helping to support out of Northern Virginia as it relates to this particular issue. So if there are any other components of this, I put this forward to you. There was one email in from a constituent. I think maybe we read that later. I'm not sure, but I can acknowledge that a gentleman, and I don't know if it's appropriate for me to say his person's name or give the address, but they sent in a note. I just don't want to, is there any problem, City Attorney Friedman, with he sent something in that, reflective of what he wanted in the package. He gives us his address and also his name. Doesn't say that he wants it anonymous or anything like that, but I could just talk about the substance of it. Maybe if you want to ask me who it was later, you're welcome to. I don't want to put anybody's business out there. But this was to, time, as he writes here, it's time to stop the required local match and fully fund at-risk students. He's asking the state to move into, and I'll read a bit of it, regarding the invitation to submit comments and weigh in. As an overstressed local taxpayer funding a school budget that penalizes city citizens, I've come to realize that the one issue that needs to be addressed is funding for the at-risk students attending public schools. As explained in the attachment, the current funding formula requires a local match, and because cities have a higher percentage of ED students attending school than do counties, cities thus have a higher per pupil expenditures and fiscal stress. While not asking for any additional local funding for the Lynchburg schools, I am asking that the state pick up, bold, all the costs of educating at-risk students. Recent reports of the state surplus in revenues of billions of dollars will allow the state to pick up in the aggregate over $132 million that is projected to be forced upon local governments for fiscal '24, thus shifting the fiscal responsibility to where it belongs. And so that was the one email that we had received from a local resident. Other than that, Mercedes, any other? None other. So I put this before the council. We're welcome to engage in a discussion. I've done what I can through the different opportunities through until tonight to make sure that I'm capturing what you want positioned for this impending General Assembly. And I'll pause there for any feedback, input, or other.
With the ECOs, I'm glad that's still on here, but there may come a time that we got to kind of start figuring out things ourselves. Senator Newman had put this legislation forward years ago, forward at the General Assembly, and Cree Deeds kind of had a different situation, and with his son, and they totally changed the issue. Meanwhile, our police officers are sitting as security guards basically in the hospital for 6, 8, 10, 12 hours, 16 hours, sitting there waiting for a psychiatrist to come. Our police officers, they have, granted, they do, some off-duty security service at Express Lane or Walmart or Kroger, but Walmart, Kroger, and Express Lane don't expect our police officers to be sitting there security for them. They hire their own. So if there's a way that we can actually really force Centra, there's had been no payment in lieu of taxes. There's been nothing regarding the fact that they should normally hire their own security, where our police officers can bring the folks in under the ECO or the TDO and then get back on the streets rather than sitting in a waiting room twiddling their thumbs for 6, 8, and 10, 12 hours because we have a big shortage. So unless, and I appreciate trying to push the General Assembly, lots of times they've been punting on this. Senator Newman had a great bill several years ago, and I'm glad to see it's resurrected. But if that doesn't happen,
I think we need to start figuring something out locally that what we can do. Centra many times comes before us for bond issues, whatnot, lots of things. It would be nice to work together as a partner to say, well, we're understaffed with our police department. They're working nonstop. There's lots of, the olden days, there used to be, I guess, like more of a holding pin that they would bring folks. That's changed, and so they have to sit there with them. We have sworn law enforcement that are sitting there. So we got to figure out something better where hopefully Centra can have their own security, or they can pay our officers to sit there, or we can maybe use the sheriff's department, maybe that aren't law enforcement, other folks that are actually can sit there waiting. Another option, you know, I know that Centra's got with a certificate of need, they're the only hospital here. I'm wondering if if our officers have to sit there for 16 hours waiting, how bad would it be to drive up to Lewis Gale or Carillion, drop somebody off, maybe it's an hour trip there and back, but they can get back on the street within 2 hours as opposed to sitting there for 16, 18 hours. So we need to, I appreciate the push at the General Assembly and legislatively at the state, but if that doesn't happen, we've got to do something different. And we've got to be prepared, I think, to act and fix our problems ourselves. And I think that's some fairly good ways that we can do that. So,
I just want to say that Governor Youngkin announced yesterday that he's put together a task force to study this various issue, because I think there were 20,000 such cases last year with an average wait time of 43 or 46 hours. So it is on the governor's screen, and hopefully stay there. Councilmember Wilder.
Just so I can get clarity, I thought it was like a state law that required the policemen that they were gonna, so does Central even have a choice in that matter?
To say that I'm well versed in the complete law, I'm not, so I'll put that up front. But you're absolutely right. Councilman Hegelson recognized there was a change at the state level that required certain things, and so that's why you have the relationship that you do, because it's required under law.
I have some thoughts. I appreciate the thought, although I'm not sure how I feel about government stepping in and mandating a nonprofit, in this case, that is essentially a business, to do X, Y, or Z. I don't believe that's the role of government, but we should find a solution that certainly handles these issues in a very tender way. Insofar as the document as a whole, I've got to say that this new software, Alicia, is wonderful. I just need to find my notes and so I can use it properly. Shout out to City Clerk. Yeah, I know. I've got to commend it to Roanoke. I think very often I look at what they're doing and I just have a lot of question marks. But I think they nailed it on this one. There needs to be a rollback of primary enforcement traffic offenses, presumption against bail, among other items. And so I'd like to see us include similar language in our legislative agenda to communicate that we want to ensure that we're properly enforcing our streets. I think there are some things that could be maintained that is already in the code that was adjusted a couple years ago. And then we need to be mindful of what some of those changes would do. But if you have an expired registration sticker, I mean, you should get pulled over for that. If you have X, Y, or Z going on, I think those are some things that we need to be considering.
That's in their current, Councilman, that's in their current legislative package, or is that a practice that they have? What I'm trying to go for is there some kind of bill or legislation that
It was included in their legislative portfolio, and I can send you the articles for that.
That'd be great. Thank you.
But that'd be something I'd consider. I have some other observations. I do remember there was conversation about shortening this document to some degree. I do tend to align with that logic, just because there is a lot here. But I'll reserve the balance of my time, I guess, and see what my colleagues have to say.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor.
So we're going to move into the business item briefings. First one is LRHA resolution to designate the Darrington Hills Apartments as a revitalization area. This item will appear before City Council for action at tonight's City Council meeting. And Dr. John Hughes is going to give an overview.
Afternoon, Madam Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor, members of council. Concerning this first business item briefing, your council packets contain information on the Lynchburg Redevelopment and Housing Authority's request to designate construction around Darrington Hills Apartments as a revitalization area. Mary Mayrose, Executive Director of LRHA, is here to provide context, and this item is on your agenda for a City Council vote later this evening. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
No problem.
Good afternoon, friends. How are you all? Happy to be here again. I'd just like to clarify, I'm not asking for a designation. I am asking you to document the fact that there is already a designation in place for this neighborhood or for this property. So LRHA has decided to go forth and propose the development of 80 new units at the Darrington Hills Apartments. We did a master plan. It was included within the Darrington Hills Neighborhood Plan that was adopted by the City Council in October of 2022. It has now been incorporated within your city comprehensive plan. In order to construct any kind of housing within this neighborhood, we have to apply for low-income housing tax credits through Virginia Housing. Oh, gosh. Hey, yay. Just a little site plan for you of where we're talking about starting our project. We call this area at the north end of the property the D, and our intention is to do some demolition in that area and build back in our first phase 80 new units. As I mentioned, we did a property assessment that resulted in a master plan that resulted in great participation from our residents and our stakeholders. And I know I saw many of your happy smiling faces at some of those meetings too. This is already existing high-density residential zoning. It's included within the revitalization area is already included within the Lynchburg Comprehensive Plan. It's included within your Midtown Master Plan, and it's now included within your neighborhood plan. Just to give you a little background very briefly on the Darrington Hills Apartments, they were constructed in late 1959, early 1960, very small units, primarily concrete block walls within the interior of the units, so the ability to merge or combine units is very impractical. Very small water heaters are located within the kitchen. It's quite an obstacle course to get your laundry into the laundry room. And there's inadequate off-street parking. In spite of some of the cosmetic work that we've done, the buildings still look like public housing, and it's time to change that. We have no ADA accessible units on the property. The aging galvanized water and gas piping is failing, and we have site slopes, of course, to deal with as well. The demolition of the existing units and development of new housing will provide improved residences and increase our housing, our affordable housing opportunities. There's your briefing. Let me know if you have any questions.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation information. Just, you said there'll be 80 new units. How many currently units are there?
Currently on the whole property, there are 100 units. This first phase will be 80. We estimate the second phase will be an additional 100, and then the third phase will finalize with a total of 242.
And will they all be apartments? There's so many different discussions, I can't remember.
Yeah, there's different architectural
Yes.
styles proposed at this time. We have some row houses, we have some townhouses, we have what we're calling a senior property, and then we have some garden-style apartments as well.
So it's like a mixed neighborhood type
Yes,
thing? Okay.
as the residents requested.
I just want to commend you again, as well as the other study, where it really took a lot of buy-in from the community. We had several sessions. One was just for the stakeholders, one was for the residents, several for the residents, going into the neighborhood meetings, into the neighborhoods. So I appreciate that. Just giving everybody a voice. Even I think one of the last ones. Then you had that meetings, and then we had the other meetings with the community development. So it was so many meetings going on, and sometimes you would go to one meeting and people get a little confused about which meeting they were at, and they ask questions for you and things. But again, I appreciate the teams all working together to improve the Darrington community, to make it more of a livable community and just build it up. And I know, and also we addressed, I know you're not in that portion, but there was a concern for several residents and persons about the gas emissions that were at the old landfill piece. But we mentioned, so the community understand, we have talked about that. Right now, it's still, the gas is still, I think the level hasn't changed, as long as we don't really touch it, from what I understand, correct? So as long as we don't touch that, and the development is not on that portion of the landfill, so that's not being touched. Just so persons in the community knows that we're not touching that landfill piece. It's going to stay the same. The gases have not been changed any over the years, and it did a recent study, and I think we suggest to continue to monitor that to make sure that gas doesn't, the level doesn't change any. Yes.
Mr. Wilder, thank you so much for mentioning that about the different meetings. We really enjoyed working with Winter staff and Kent White and Tom Martin and his planning team. Ann Nygaard did a fabulous job on that neighborhood plan, so we really enjoyed that partnership.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you. As a member of the Housing Authority Board, I just want to thank you, Mayor Rose, and your team for working with the community to develop the types of property that they want to see, that they've been waiting for. And on behalf of the board, I wanted to thank you for this proposal as well, and for working through the process. So we're looking forward to that improved and increased housing stock, because you definitely have that need and waiting list there. So thank you.
It's a great location. Thank you, Trinae, I appreciate that.
Any other comments, questions? Thank you very much. Thank you. Next item is the FY 2024 Community Development Block Grant, CDBG, and Home Program Annual Action Plan Goals. This will appear before City Council for action on January 10th, 2023, and Ms. Malva Walker.
They promised me the slide would come right up. Well, it's time to begin the annual action plan process. It's hard to believe, but the first item in that process is to approve the housing and non-housing goals, review those and approve those for the next fiscal year. This is a requirement from HUD that the public have an opportunity to comment on the goals that were established in the consolidated plan for 2020 through 2024. You have received those goals, the housing goals and the non-housing goals. The next steps will be that you will have a public hearing on January 10th. I'll run a public notice beginning on December 23rd to advise everyone that the public hearing will be held then. And so I'll be back then. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next item is Eastwood Park Future Land Use Map Amendment and Rezoning. This item will appear before City Council for action January 10th, 2023, and Ms. Rachel Felshauser.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council. The purpose of this briefing is just to let council know about an upcoming land use public hearing. As stated, it's coming your way in January. So Bob Connor, Inc. is petitioning to rezone these properties from R1 low-density residential and B1C limited business district conditional to R4C high-density residential conditional, and to amend the future land use map from low-density residential to high-density residential to allow the construction of 119 townhomes at 615, 619, 623, and 651 Leesville Road. The future land use map recommends institution and neighborhood commercial uses for these areas where the proposed access road is located. The future land use map recommends low density and resource conservation uses for 619 and 651 Leesville Road, which is the area where the townhomes would be located. Low-density residential areas are dominated by single-family detached housing at densities of up to 4 dwelling units per acre. The petition proposes to amend the future land use map from low-density residential to high-density residential. These areas are characterized by higher densities, typically townhomes or multifamily housing at densities of up to 30 units per acre. The Planning Commission held a public hearing at their meeting on November 9th and recommended denial of the petition. And again, this item will come back to you for public hearing on January 10th.
I'm glad that the planning commission did recommend their
Minutes, I'm glad they recommended denial.
Just a question. So
I believe this is the spot. This is next to the church, the Methodist church, or
Yes.
around it.
Yes.
So what procedure does the city have for these type of developments insofar as someone buys the land, someone starts developing it, goes through the process, and then we arrive at now where it's before city council for continue on to the next process. Within that timeline, the trees are decimated. I mean, they're gone. So even if this is denied, that whole plot is just toast. There's nothing we can do to rearrange the order procedure in that in some fashion, because this is the second one within 5 minutes of something of that magnitude, where now there's an empty lot, some development has gone into it, it was denied, or in the other case, the financing fell through, and the neighbors are now left with just an open field that used to be trees.
Well, so clearing is permitted. Now, grading should not be occurring. They shouldn't be moving dirt at any scale out there. But clearing and logging, those are not determined by the rezoning. So they can do that regardless of whether this gets approved or not. I hear what you're saying. It sounds preemptive, but I don't know of any way we could stop that. Because, like I said, anyone could clear, and as long as they're not violating a rule like erosion and sediment, without a land disturbance permit or something like that, I can't think of a way we would prevent that.
I know I'm catching you off guard, so forgive me. Is there something that we can reference, for example, a locality that says if you have acreage more than 3 and you want to take out trees, you need to get some approval of sorts? I'm not trying to make more burdens for people who own their property and want to do what they have with their own property, far from it, but I mean, this is the second time something of this magnitude in this neck of town has occurred,
I think
to my knowledge.
I think the Department of Forestry oversees logging, so we'd probably need to look into that.
We can, and I think there's also percentages that cities require or lean into as far as what's called a tree canopy. And sometimes that percentage or number then either equates to a developer having to mitigate in the timbers that they take down. That usually causes that pause, if you will. So that if there's a canopy that you've agreed to that Lynchburg wants to, strive towards, and is Jenny still around? No. I don't know what that is for us, but I think there are ways, and I can work together with Rachel to figure out, to bring back in one of the memos that we send to you, whether or not there's on parity, anybody that has a creative approach to this thing that you're talking about.
The last thing I want to do is make it so that if someone wants to take down 3 or 4 trees on their property, they have to go through the government to approve that. Far, far from that. But multiple acres, more than 5, I mean, and you're completely taking everything out, and then the development fails, the neighbors are the one with holding the empty bag.
And I think it's just by anecdote, when we built IKEA, it was on 24 acres, and they were, now that I'm here, they are the Darth Vader of the wood industry in the world. They take down 1% of all the trees in the world to build what they do, but because of not having the context or framework within which to actually have them think this through, they then mitigated themselves and gave like $150,000 to the botanical garden. So some of this is just it's private land ownership and private property. They've purchased it, and to Rachel's point about they can kind of with obviously, certain exceptions, they can move forward and start to clear.
Yeah, and far from it. I do not want to interfere with someone's property and what they want to do. I was about to ask this, but it's approximately 28.37 acres. Okay. I associate my comments with Councilmember Helgeson, and I'd appreciate some digging into this in a way that does not infringe on my right to take down a tree.
We'll put it in the memos that we send to you guys.
Appreciate it.
Yes, I just think for further conversation in the new year, I think I had mentioned it some time ago, I think it would be helpful to have a discussion with the Planning Commission as well as the developers, if it's at a work session or whatever we could do, just so the Planning Commission can kind of hear the ideas for City Council, and also we can hear some input from them as well as developers, because you just see so many developments coming up, and then they answer for a CPU or whatever, or the change to this or change to that. I think if we kind of get some understanding of what the planning is for the city, and so developers can understand, and also the Planning Commission can understand the line of the City Council. So it won't be they're saying one thing and we're just denying the process. I think it just helps us be more unified as a city, so developers can know this is what the standard is now, so they won't be investing funds and cutting down trees, and then it's going to get denied. So I think it'd be a helpful process at some point in the new year if we kind of get the teams together so we can have a conversation going forward. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, Dr. Wells. You have brought that up, and I will say, in the interim, Kent White is actually pulling many of the developers that have built some of these developments and asked, why are these particular projects? And maybe you've got a date pending, I'm not sure when it is, but it's to ask these questions as to when you're making your investment, why is it these projects as opposed to others, and maybe why these areas as opposed to others. And so hopefully that conversation helps, but absolutely we can have a joint meeting with the Planning Commission.
Just a couple. I mean, one, I think, I'm glad that the Planning Commission actually has heard what council has said recently. I mean, this is R1, and you have a developer that can ask to say, hey, we want R1 to go to the most, single-family housing to go into the most high-density R4, and they turn them down, so, which is good. With regarding the trees, there was another project over on Alta Lane, and I remember that, and I talked to the developer recently. He proposed putting a bunch of apartments. After we denied those apartments, like a week later, every tree was cut down, and I knew it was kind of like punitive almost for the neighborhood. But the beautiful thing is now, in place of all those trees that he cut down, he's now made what it should have been, R1 single-family homes. And really beautiful single-family homes over in Vista Acres. And so all of that is now stayed R1, and built some really nice houses that are actually going to increase the values in the neighborhood, so, and done very well, so.
Thank you.
Very briefly, at least these are townhomes. I'll throw that out there. Thank you.
So 434 Center, 1001, 1009, and Dillard Drive, and 2009 Enterprise Drive conditional use permit. This item will appear before City Council for action tonight at our formal docket.
Madam Mayor, members of council, TPB Enterprises LLC is petitioning for this conditional use permit to allow the construction of 306 apartment units in a B3C Community Business District conditional. A conditional use permit was previously approved on this property on August 13th, 2019 to allow the construction of 116 apartments. That CUP has expired because 24 months have elapsed. As part of that same 2019 petition, the property was also rezoned at the time from I2 and I2C Light Industrial District to B3C Community Business District conditional. The proffers included the prohibition of several B3 uses and some traffic improvements on Dillard Drive. These proffers are still intact and no changes are proposed to the zoning at this time. The city's future land use map recommends a mixed use designation for this area. These areas don't fit into any one single use category, as they are planned for a mix of uses, generally consisting of large undeveloped or greenfield spaces that are intended to be developed as a balanced mix of residential, neighborhood commercial, parks, civic uses, open spaces, etc. The Planning Commission held a public hearing for this item on November 9th and recommended approval of the petition, and council again is scheduled to hold a public hearing this evening.
Okay, Vice Mayor, right?
Thank you very much. So we received some compelling drone footage of what a shift change looks like from the folks at J. Crew who are just down the street. Can you speak more to the traffic considerations behind this petition?
Okay. And I will also say engineering is here, city engineer and traffic engineer, so I assume they will correct me if I'm wrong, and if we get more into the weeds on this, I might have to call them in. So a traffic study and turn lane analysis was conducted with the proposed development in the 2019 petition, and based on that analysis, there were no appreciable impacts that would have been caused with traffic associated from that proposal. A right turn lane warrant was met for northbound vehicles using the Enterprise Drive entrance, and the developer also proposed a right turn lane at that entrance. A left turn lane warrant was also met for southbound vehicles on Enterprise Drive, although there's currently a two-way left available there. Right turn lane and left turn lane warrants were not met on Dillard Drive. And again, so those conditions that were approved as part of that rezoning are still going to be required for this development or any development that is proposed until the zoning is changed. And as part of this petition, an updated trip generation comparison memo was generated. Although the number of proposed residential units has increased from the previous CUP, which was 116 in 2019 and is 306 in this petition, the memo shows that the total trips per day would actually decrease with what is being proposed now, mainly due to the smaller size of the gymnasium and fitness center. It was, in 2019, proposed to be 126,000 square feet and is only 25,000 square feet with this petition.
Okay. So just to be clear, the analysis takes into account, does it take into account traffic as of today? I understand that you're saying that trip, but for example, has J. Crew's staffing and light industrial use on that road changed significantly since 2019?
So my understanding, and I've had limited communication and involvement with J. Crew, but my understanding is that they have a large number of seasonal, temporary type employees. You know, it's Thanksgiving, Christmas. This is their time. So you know, I can't speak to the cars that are going into that facility today versus you know, the other 10, 11 months of the year.
They mentioned a lot about like how they have, you know, tractor trailer trucks transitioning that road sort of at all hours of the day, and you know, sort of egress would be difficult for them if there is a large development at the end of that road. And so I guess I'm struggling to know exactly how to think of that and factor that into our consideration.
Understandable. Yeah, I think the keys are that you know, less trips are being generated. That memo shows that we don't need to do additional improvements over what was already proffered. All those are still going to happen. The petitioner has also shown in a write-in, write-out on Enterprise, which may help. Yeah, you know, I'm not sure. The petitioner, yes.
Thank you.
Just say something in connection with this whole traffic study, because it was my understanding that when they did the traffic study in 2019, they did not go all the way down the road to where the cul-de-sac is and the parking lot for 1,000 cars. So they just ended it about up midway. So I don't think they really, unless I was told incorrectly by the J. Crew folks, unless they really looked at that, I don't know how that traffic study can really be of any validity. I'm having a little problem with that.
Well, yeah.
Don't be anywhere, you can stay up here.
Okay, I'm here.
So the traffic study that was done in 2019 was done by Hurt and Profit, and it looked at the intersection of Dillard Drive and Enterprise Drive. So it took all the traffic that was down the street because it was looking at it as it was coming out of the street at Enterprise Drive. So yes, it should have taken into account all of the traffic down Dillard Drive.
One of the things that was explained to me when I was out there is that they have all these 18-wheelers, that they have the warehouse up on the left-hand side at the beginning of the drive, and these 18-wheelers are going up all day long, up and down to the warehouse to pick up supplies to bring them back down. And that was the complaint they had. They felt like it really wasn't an adequate study because it didn't take into account all those big trucks coming back and forth, because they're moving back and forth all day on that road.
Right, but that shouldn't affect this development on the end of the road either.
Well, because they're going right by it.
This is the
Because
corner.
their entry will be off of Dillard to the development. Yeah, maybe
This
you
is,
can, maybe
this
you
is
can
on the
straighten
corner,
out
right? This
on that.
development is on the corner.
They would be counted because they're coming through the intersection,
If I
right?
may, Madam Mayor, I don't believe J. Crew operated out of that current building at the intersection in 2019 as well. I'm not sure if that's the case or not, but forgive me.
Thank you.
If I
Go ahead.
I have had extensive conversations both with the developer and meetings and folks about this development, and this is really hard because I want to protect a massive employer and business entity that is in the city, has been for a very long time, but also balance, we need to, again, have the housing conversation. There's a need for that. And so that's a balance I'm having here, and yet in fully digging into this, and I'll have further comments this evening, and fully digging into this, I cannot support this. And I'm frustrated that in my discussions, it's communicated to me that the large employer down the road on Dillard wasn't consulted and didn't find out about this project happening until 2 days before the Planning Commission. And I'm not associating that with staff. I'm not associating that with anyone in this room per se. It's my understanding that would have been incumbent on the developer. Needless to say, with 17,500 tractor trailers and support vehicles coming down Dillard Drive in 2022 alone, with an average of 1,460 vehicles per month at that intersection right now, I don't see how adding in 300 plus apartments, a gym, and a restaurant decreases the traffic volume. That's just my own personal assessment. I trust everyone in traffic, but I really do struggle with that. And so being as it is in Ward 4, as a matter of fact, I want J. Crew to be able to expand, and they're communicating to me that such a development would put a big hindrance on their expansion. That's something I'm trying to be mindful of. The traffic, the continued congestion of Enterprise is a concern of mine. So a lot more issues to bring up, but I don't want to belabor the point. I do have serious concerns about this and plan on casting my oppositional vote.
Just a quick question, kind of to follow up. Now, since J. Crew is down the street, I saw the notice of the public hearing. Excuse me. Don't they send person notices in the area if there's a public hearing?
So our code requires that we do a certain number of public notices. One of those is the posted signs that you see along the frontage, the big white signs with the block letters. We also have to run the legal notice in the newspaper. And we also have to notify property owners within 200 feet of the affected property. J. Crew would not fall within 200 feet of, they're all the way at the other end of Dillard Drive. So they would not have received a letter. We'd always, put in our staff comments, when we're reviewing projects, that we encourage developers to reach out to surrounding property owners. And, they have that option.
And the notice, how long does the notice have to be up before a public hearing?
The signs have to be up 30 days prior to the first public hearing, so 30 days prior to Planning Commission.
So at least the notice should have been up for at least 30 days prior to the hearing.
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you, appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I just want to say that I think it can both be true that the theoretical number of trips between the 2019 plan and this one decreased. That can be true. And it can also be true that the concerns that we didn't hear back in 2019 but raised today also, now have validity. So I think both of these things can be true, and this gives us an opportunity to reassess the merit of this development, given that the developer allowed the CUP to lapse by not, initiating construction within 2 years. Is that the requirement?
Right. It was a different petitioner at that time. So this petitioner is looking to purchase the project from them, but they don't have the go-ahead on the CUP because it's expired, correct?
So this gives council an opportunity to reevaluate the fitness of this, no pun intended because of the fitness facility, but the merits of this petition. Thank you.
And this has drastically changed from what it was 3 years ago. I mean, I was here, several of us were here at 2019, and I think you mentioned that it was 100 apartments, now it's 300. So it's 3 times the apartments. The last time, I think you said 125,000 square feet for the commercial, now it's 25, so it's 1/5 of the commercial. So it's a vastly different project, and it's a vastly different day. When we approve something, we kind of, and especially with the conditional use permit, you're approving based on those conditions. And this is a vastly different project, so very different than what it was before. And, possibly J.Crew, even if they were notified 3 years ago, is vastly different. It is now totally different. I mean, you're looking at 4 stories of apartments, and it's very different. And I don't think this is a good use. I read the Planning Commission meeting minutes. They had lots of good reasons from a land use perspective, which I'll hold to tonight. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Okay, we are at roll call. Dr. Tweedy?
No comments.
Councilmember Helgeson?
Here.
Councilmember Farrelly?
Couple things. Once again, Mustache for Kids blows me away. I want to commend everybody who participated and apparently continues to participate. I wish I could, but I would look far more my age, and my fiance would kill me. But I do want to commend everybody for the resources that they poured in and gave for that wonderful entity. And so thank you all for participating, and thank you all for, almost all for shaping. I got to commend Heritage and EC Glass. They both made really great strides with their football programs this year, and it was a really good thing to see how, especially Heritage in the second half of that game, came out real ticked off, and they put up a heck of a fight right to the very end. And so I got to commend Coach Bradley and the rest of his coaching staff and the team for their zeal for putting up a fight to the very end and making Lynchburg proud. And then also the Christmas parade seemed to go off very well, and it was great to see everybody there. I'm looking forward to celebrating the Christmas holiday and the rest of the holiday season with family, and I hope everyone else does as well.
Dr. Wiley?
Yeah, just to reiterate what Chris just mentioned about the Mustache for Kids, they raised $503,000 in 30 days. That's just amazing for the children of our community. And I want to commend all the city staff, the police chief, the fire chief, and so many others that participated in that project. I think Chief Zudem was like one of the top ones, like $6,000, $7,000, whatever. I only had about 3. But again, we appreciate all the work that they're doing for the kids in our community. And especially congratulate Chris Boswell, who's the head of the project, and the work that they do and the passion they have for the kids in our community. It's so amazing. I want to thank them for all of that. Thank you. That's it.
Okay, Vice Mayor?
No items.
No items, thank you. I have no items. So, Next, consideration of a closed session to discuss the resolution of an active lawsuit currently faced by the city pursuant to 2.2-37117 and 2.2-37118 of the Code of Virginia, 1950, as amended, and to discuss the appointments to the following boards and commissions: Lynchburg Regional Airport Commission, Planning Commission, Community Development Advisory Commission, Horizon Behavioral Health Board of Directors, Economic Development Authority, Lynchburg Redevelopment Housing Authority, Lynchburg Parking Authority, and Greater Lynchburg Transit Company Board of Directors pursuant to Section 2.23711A1 of the Code of Virginia, 1950, as amended. May I have a motion that we go into a closed meeting?
So moved. Second.
Second. Thank you very much. Cast your vote.
Dr. Tweedy?